What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Upon Further Review. Actually, we got to throw up the actual Upon Further Review background. Bam! There it is. So,
Money.
obviously, I'm Vince. That's Trevor. Brian, our esteemed leader, is traveling back from Miami, and he's going to be welcomed by a blanket of snow. And I'm sure he's excited about that as he comes from South Beach and whatever else is down in Miami. So we're gonna take it home. We're gonna take the Penn State Notre Dame game home for all of you, and we're gonna have some fun with this thing. And we've dived into the film. We've got some thoughts about kind of what happened. So here's how it's gonna go. I'm gonna lay out the roadmap for you. I'm gonna talk about the game. We're gonna revisit the keys on offense and defense. And then we're going to talk offense and what stood out, maybe that we didn't cover during the post game on both sides of the ball. And then we're going to get the heck out of here. And I know that sounds very short, but we've got a lot of stuff to cover within that roadmap. So we're pretty pumped to be here, to be perfectly honest with you. I got to tell you, Trevor, I'm pretty excited to be doing a semifinal version of Upon Further Review, and the fact that Notre Dame is involved in that semifinal. And obviously we're going to be talking about a national championship game against the Ohio State Buckeyes here for the next 8 days. So pretty fired up about that, but we got to put a bow on the Penn State game and what Notre Dame was able to do. Last second field goal from my main man, Mitch, and everything that means and all of that. So Trevor, let's talk about the game. So overall, let's take everybody back to kind of how the whole thing played out. Tale of two halves, man. That's the best way I can describe it. Tale of two halves. Penn State kicked Notre Dame's butt up and down the field in the first half. Rewatching the game, it still happened in the first half, and it was not pretty if you're a Notre Dame fan, Trevor. But again, like I said, tale of two different halves.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's one, you said something that I love too. It's awesome that we can be on this side of this conversation. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like it's so much better to do Upon Further Review after a win, especially when that win punches your ticket to the national championship game, man. I mean, it's a lot of fun to talk about. But yeah, I mean, it was a tale of two halves, and we're going to dive into it a little bit here in this show, but it was a tale of two different halves for both sides of the ball, right? Offense and defense needed to make the necessary adjustments to come away with a win. And Notre Dame scored 27 points, and they put their first points on the board with under 20 seconds left to go in the first half, right? Rattled off 24 points in the second half. Defense held Penn State to -3 yards rushing in the third quarter. So it's one of those where the coordinators were on full display. The adjustments that they made were on full display. And you could tell that the demeanor of the team was very much, hey, there's a chance that this might be the last 30 minutes of football we play in these uniforms. You know what I mean? And so they came out fired up, and you could tell that it was different, right? It was definitely a little different. But, overall, I mean, the game was what I've told everybody is, and I don't know if you guys agree with me, Vince, I don't know if you agree with me, but take Notre Dame and Penn State away, and you just talk about what you wanted to get out of a semifinals in a college football playoff. And that was it. Had a little bit of everything: crucial turnovers, big plays, response and punch after counter punch, and a game-winning field goal. And so for me, it was everything that you could ask for. And it makes it even more sweet from a Notre Dame fan standpoint, because these are the games that Notre Dame historically has not won. Mm-hmm. I think of the instant classic type games that Notre Dame has played in, the 2005 USC game, the 2017 and 2019 Georgia games, the 2023 2023 Ohio State game. And the biggest thing that a lot of those have in common is Notre Dame wasn't on the winning side of those.
Correct.
And so this one was a little bit sweeter, and I'm glad we can relish in it one more time before, me, you, Brian, and Sean Stiers all kind of dive into the matchup in the national championship, because there's going to be a lot of good stuff coming out of Irish Breakdown here over the next, week and some change. But the game as a whole, like I said, Vince, I don't know if you agree, but it's everything that you could have asked for if you're just a football fan and wanted to watch good football in the playoffs, man.
That I completely agree with, because if you take a step back from being a Notre Dame fan and living and dying on every play and every possession and all of that, was a great football game. It was a great football game that came down to literally the last possession. I mean, what more could you ask for out of a Final Four game if you're a college football fan, right? I mean, and even the game last night was basically came down to the final possession, right? I mean, Texas was going in to score to tie the game, and they call a terrible toss play, they lose their yardage, and then, you got the strip sack taken back for a touchdown. The final score is not indicative of how that game was played. You know what I mean? And so two really good games in the Final Four leading up to hopefully a really good game in the championship. I mean, I don't think the College Football Playoff Committee or college football in general could have asked for a better final two games, at least the semifinal games. And again, like I said, hopefully the national championship game is just as exciting. And then obviously, hopefully Notre Dame comes out on top. But just a great two games to watch as a college football fan. And I think now 48 hours later, I think my heart is now finally like back to normal after that whole thing. So, but a great game, and obviously Notre Dame came out on top, which is fantastic, which is why we get to have this conversation in the manner in which we are going to have this conversation, Trevor. And so, just real quick, we kind of touched on this in the post game, but big picture for Notre Dame, they're playing in the national championship game. That this is something that the vast majority of college football fans, college football analysts, national, local, whatever, you could probably count on one hand the amount of people that thought Notre Dame would be in this game, right? They all thought Ohio State was going to be in this game because of the roster and what they did in the transfer portal, the new offensive coordinator and Chip Kelly, like all of those things. They all thought Ohio State was going to be here. I don't think they thought Notre Dame was going to be here. So, we're going to obviously talk big picture once the entire season is over. But at this point where we stand here on January 11th, what does this mean for Notre Dame to you?
It's interesting because before the game, I was like, Notre Dame got their program needle moving win when they beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. I'm not saying wasn't overlooking Penn State by any means. I wasn't saying that they're a worse off opponent. We had all been quoted as saying we believed Penn State had a better offense than what Georgia had. Right. And I think that was on display in the Orange Bowl. I really do. But the manner in how they won, I think, moved the needle a little bit more. The thing that's going to blow it wide open, obviously, is if they walk away with a victory on January 20th, right?
100%. Yes, of course.
But I was one of those that came into this game under the impression of Notre Dame's not really going to move their program needle very much by beating Penn State because they got their New Year's Six Bowl. They beat the SEC champs. But here we are having this conversation, right? And so now Notre Dame has shown that they can win another kind of game, right? They were down. They had their biggest halftime deficit of the season since Northern Illinois. And it was one of those where I texted you guys during the game and it's like, okay, time to change the narrative. You've shown that you can win different styles of games, right? You've won games where you've just came out of the gate and you were the most dominant team and there was no chance the team on the other side of the field was going to catch up with you. You won the games where you started out close and things didn't go your way, but the defense was able to step up or the offense was able to step up. And so we've seen them win that kind of game. But the one that we hadn't seen yet was how is Notre Dame going to handle coming back at a relatively decent-sized halftime deficit when Penn State had most of the momentum. That field goal at the end of the half, I think, was massive.
It was no, look, listen, it was huge. And then obviously, like, I had to talk myself into the fact that Notre Dame was only down 7 at halftime, right? Because it felt like, I mean, to Irish for Life 99's point, he says, when we were down by 10, it felt like we were down by 30. Like, that's legit. Like, it felt like Notre Dame was getting their butts handed to them in the first half, but they were only down 10. And then, of course, Steve Angeli leads the team down. They kick a field goal. They're only down 7 and they're getting the ball, to start off the first half. I had to verbally convince myself that they're only down 7 points because it absolutely didn't feel that way, to your point.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was stomping around the living room and I was pissed off and I was not happy with how the game went. And Lauren was kind of like, they're down by a touchdown, right? And they get the ball. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't feel like it, man. Like it
didn't.
Irish for Life brought up a good point. But, for me, that's what it means overall, big pictures. They showed just another way to win. They beat the second place team in the Big Ten as obviously since they played in the Big Ten championship and didn't come out the victor. But for Notre Dame, it's just they showed that they can win this style of football game, and it's huge. And now leading up to it, Vince, going into yesterday, it was so nice to be able to sit back and watch a good football game and not have it affect my heart rate.
No kidding.
And now we know, though, we know who Notre Dame is going to face on January 20th. And I will like to say I called this shot before the season started. I wasn't with Irish Breakdown full-time yet, but I said that Notre Dame and Ohio State were going to meet each other in the national championship, and I have my sources to back it up. But here we are.
Wow, Nostradamus over there.
I know it, but it's going to be a good game, man. And I know our friends down in the SEC are not going to be happy that football for the second straight year is going to run through the North, but it is what it is.
It's true.
It is what it is, but it's going to be a good matchup. And I'm going to have an article coming out about this later next week, but it's kind of perfect, right? Like Marcus Freeman kind of has the ability to complete a full circle moment for himself, right? His first ever game as a head coach in the regular season was against his alma mater, Ohio State in Columbus, and they lost 21-10. And in a season where it seemed like Notre Dame was going to come back on the map and they started out really hot in 2023 and they competed with Ohio State for 4 quarters. They were just the better team the last 58 seconds of that game. Mm-hmm. And, nobody's going to talk about how competitive it was. Nobody was going to talk about how close it was. They're just going to talk about how Notre Dame ran 10 guys out on the field out of a timeout and during a goal line stand. And so now you have a chance, third time's the charm, to redeem yourself in the national championship. And I'm not going to dive too much into it now because we are going to talk about this game after this episode for, days to come. But I don't know, Vince, it feels like a good redemption arc. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It feels good.
I like the narrative. About. I love the narrative. As far as big picture, I didn't, beating Georgia, the New Year's Six thing, like all of those narratives were gone at that point. It was great. It felt really good. And it was like, okay, season can end. It's probably going to be fine. And we're going to have a lot of good things to talk about in the offseason. And then you get to it and you're like, okay, well, it's Penn State. We've been talking about how Notre Dame should have been ranked ahead of Penn State all season. And now they get a chance to meet on the field. And so it was a great opportunity for Notre Dame. And you're right. And I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but they hadn't won a game like that all season. All of the wins that they had up to that point, right? They hadn't won a game like that where they were trailing by double digits, where they were down by as much as they were. They hadn't had that game. And I distinctly remember hearing so many pundits talk about, what happens if Notre Dame's down double digits? How do they respond? Well, they were down double digits in the first half, and they responded by rattling off 17 points in a row. Now, to Penn State's credit, they scored, and then Notre Dame scored, and then Penn State, so Penn State was just as resilient, to be perfectly honest with you. And if that game went longer, there's a chance Penn State goes down and scores again. I mean, it was a back and forth game just like that. And Notre Dame found a way to win that game in the manner in which they did it. And that's the big takeaway for me. And that's the big picture takeaway for me as well, that, Notre Dame just doesn't win those games in the past. When they're down by 10 in a big moment like this, they didn't win those games, period. And they have a belief, they have a culture, they have a head coach, they have 2 coordinators that aren't giving up until it's 3 zeros on the board and by the clock. And it showed. A lot of that is coach speak, and I get it, but they proved it on the field, and they did it with a bunch of backups, and they just hadn't won a game like that. So that's a major needle mover for me, because you can use that on the recruiting trail, right? Because, hey, maybe you don't start the season as a starter, but you better be ready to go, because, across the board, almost every position group on this team has had to deal with injuries, and it's been a next man up mentality that they've all adopted. And I'm going through the position groups in my head. Every single position group had issues. Specialists had issues, obviously. Offensive line, running back, quarterback, defensive backfield, linebacker, defensive line, like literally every position group except wide receiver of all places, that I don't think they had an injury. But
even Bo Collins sat out the second half.
There you go. So every single position group on this team dealt with injuries, and it was a next man up mentality. and they proved that they could do it. So, look, one more game, obviously, where those guys are going to have to do it one more time. But at this point, I mean, this is a major needle mover, regardless of what happens in the next game. At this point, what we wanted from Marcus Freeman, you take a step every year, right? There was a step from year 1 to year 2. There was a step from year 2 to year 3. And there was a bit of a leap from year 3 to year 4. And again, pending what happens next Monday, it could be a massive leap, right? But even at this point, it's a leap. So it's major big picture for Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it for me.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, man, I completely agree. His progression from year 2 to year 3 has been, I think leap is a good way to phrase that. And regardless of the outcome of what happens with all the injuries that they've had to overcome, getting to this point, regardless, has been spectacular. I'm with you. So
we kind of mentioned the game that was last night. And, now Notre Dame knows who their opponent is. So I'm sure the Goog is a flutter with preparation and everything else today. I'm guessing, and I don't have any proof of this, I'm guessing the players pretty much had the day off today. They probably brought him in for a walkthrough or, a weightlifting session, something along those lines just to keep him up and keep him active. But most likely, I would imagine they did not have a full practice today. It's a prep day. It is a film day. It is a, hey, let's get a game plan together day. And now we, as fans and as analysts, we now know that Ohio State is the opponent for Notre Dame. And you and I were talking about it in our little pre-show chat. Going into last night, I wanted Texas to win because I thought Notre Dame had a better shot at beating Texas than they did at beating Ohio State. And then I sat down and I watched that game. And look, it's anybody's game next week. That was my takeaway from last night, is that it's anybody's game. I'm not saying Notre Dame is going to win. I'm not saying Ohio State's going to win. I'm saying it's anybody's game because I do think what Notre Dame has going for them is that they have the ability to make Ohio State do some different things that they may not feel comfortable doing. I'm not saying Ohio State's not going to do a good job with that because we'll see, but they do have the ability to force Ohio State on both sides of the ball to do some things that they may not be super comfortable doing in the same manner that Texas did. So I think it's anybody's game moving forward. I'm going to have fun breaking it down and getting it ready and, talking about it and everything. But now we know who Ohio State is, or who their opponent is, I should say, in Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm happy that we didn't have to wait too long to find that out. And all of our predictions ended up coming right. I'm pretty sure everybody on the IB staff predicted Ohio State to win that football game. But in the manner that how they won, and it was a great game, right? Like, this is not a slight to, I know we have Ohio State fans that listen to the show. This isn't a slight to anybody that loves Ohio State or that's their team. It's just after watching the game, it made me a little bit more comfortable with what Notre Dame's matchup is going to be in the national championship. Because if Ohio State came out and did to Texas what they did to Tennessee and what they did to Oregon, it's going to make me feel a certain type of way, right?
Sure.
As it would anybody. But, it's going to be really, really two good football programs going at it right now.
Oh,
right?
It's a heavyweight bout, right? I mean, this is two heavyweights that's going at it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and it's going to be awesome to cover, and we're going to have so much awesome things coming out about this just throughout the course of the week, right? But it's a cool story because Ohio State was the team that was predicted to win it at the start of the year based on the transfer portal pickups that they got and hiring Chip Kelly and the players that bought into the program and elected to forego the NFL draft and come back, right? So they were the clear favorite. And then after week 1, Notre Dame was the clear favorite from an odds perspective to make the playoffs. But then each team had a really bad loss. Like, yes, I understand. I'm not going to talk about Northern Illinois because everybody has heard that same old song and dance by now. And same thing with Ohio State fans. They've understood it. They've heard it about Michigan. And yes, I understand that it's a rivalry game, but the manner of the loss was not characteristic to what Ohio State had done that entire year. Both teams have overcome really bad losses this year, and they're both playing in the national championship. To me, that's my biggest takeaway of this matchup. right? In the 4-team playoff format, you would have teams all the time that were ranked 5 and 6 and narrowly missed. Like, well, we could have competed. And of course, everybody's like, well, obviously not, because you weren't one of the top 4 teams.
Right.
Now, I think it's poetic that in the very first playoff expanded, the 2 teams playing in it were the 7 seed and the 8 seed.
Yeah.
And I think that tells a lot about just when teams get hot at the right time. And Notre Dame and Ohio State were 2 of the hottest teams coming into the playoffs after the first round of the playoffs, I'll say. So it's really interesting, and it's going to be something really fun to cover, man. I'm excited.
Yep. Completely agree with that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're all excited about it. And we will dig more into that, I believe, starting on Monday. I'm not exactly sure what the schedule is, but I don't think we have anything planned for tomorrow. But you never know. And you know what? That's why you have to hit the notification bell, because then you'll know if we have a show tomorrow. Who knows what happens when Brian comes back into town, sees all the snow, gets all excited, and wants to have a show tomorrow. I mean, it's definitely a possibility. So got to hit that notification bell if you want to know if there's going to be a show tomorrow. And of course, if you're on the boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com, you'll also know if there's going to be a show tomorrow, because there'll be a post about it. So 2 different ways that you can find out if we're going to do a show tomorrow. But I can guarantee you the next show, whatever it is, whenever it is going to be about Ohio State. So you're definitely going to want to tune in for that. Real quick, Trev, let's jump into the keys revisited. And we got some overall keys to revisit here. And you guys did it a little bit differently this week. And basically you gave 5 reasons that Notre Dame will win. So we're going to revisit those. And then we're going to revisit the 3 biggest concerns that you and Brian had going into the game. Sound like a good idea?
Love it, man. Let's do it.
All right. So one of the first reasons that Notre Dame was going to win that you guys came up with was they are the better team and are more battle tested. And I feel like that probably played itself out at the end. But I mean, it was a knockdown drag out. The one thing that Franklin kept saying over and over again when they do those ridiculous interviews in between quarters, which I'm still hugely against. But he kept saying, this is going to be a 4-quarter game. I mean, it's going to be back and forth. It's going to be a 4-quarter game. And it absolutely was that.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think for the first point, we talked about how we believe Notre Dame was the better team. And I think over the course of that football game, I think that we can call that confirmed, right? And you can look at it from multiple different ways. Some of the way that I look at that is in the big moments, Notre Dame's guys made more plays than the Penn State guys. I think it's a pretty fundamental way to explain it, but it's true. You know, like look, Riley Leonard outplayed Drew Aller.
Yes.
That night.
Absolutely. And I haven't heard enough people talking about that, by the way.
Me neither. Look, the interceptions were bad. And after going back through and watching the game, I am even more upset about it than when I was watching it live, right? Because they were 2 interceptions. That was just, I understand you're trying to go out there and you're trying to make a play. Sometimes in situations like that first interception, you dump it off to Mitch Evans. He might run for a first down, right? He was running underneath and the linebacker had already committed to covering Jaden Harrison, who was running a deep end. So you never know what happens there, but I do know what happens if you hit Mitchell Evans. It doesn't result in an interception, right?
I will say this, and this is going to be a little rosy colored glasses, and I'm okay with that. Notre Dame's had quarterbacks in the past that would not throw that ball, right? And granted, it was a turnover. I get that. And I don't want turnovers, especially in a big moment like that, right? And so I can see both sides of the argument in that, okay, well, if you eat that ball and don't throw it at all, which is what happened with Notre Dame quarterbacks in the past, because they were so afraid of making a mistake, they eat that, probably to either take a sack or whatever, and they're afraid to throw that ball. I actually don't mind, and this is me talking, I don't mind Riley Leonard letting that one go, because he was open. He overthrew him. And he said in the post-game show, like, I would have never forgiven myself if I didn't try to at least take that shot. I like the guy. I like it when a quarterback's at least going to take a shot. And I missed that a lot in some former quarterbacks at Notre Dame. So just little devil's advocate there, Trevor. I understand completely where you're coming from. I'm just happy that Notre Dame finally has a quarterback that's willing to let the ball fly.
No, that I'll agree with you. I get that completely. For me, it comes down situationally, I think a little bit too. But no, man, I mean, I would rather, look, if the interception was aggressive and due to aggressive play, so be it. I can live with it. And at the end of the day, they won the game.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but look, and I've already seen some people in the chat talk about it. If you're going to let Riley Leonard's 2 interceptions dictate your opinion of how he played for the entire game,
Right.
I'm sorry, we just didn't watch the same football game.
Right.
Like Riley Leonard came back and there were throws that he was making against Penn State that he hadn't made all year long. Right? Like, can we all agree upon that? The back shoulder to Jaden Greathouse, the wheel route to Aeneas Williams, the sideline.
He dropped that in the bucket, man.
I know the sideline seam to Mitchell Evans when he made a contested catch. Like I said in the postgame show, he did something that we hadn't seen all year, and he was trusting his guys to go up and make a play one-on-one. So, like I said, when I say that Riley Leonard outplayed Drew Aller, I'm not saying that Riley Leonard played perfect. But in the key moments where they needed to, Riley Leonard did exactly what he needed to. Drew Aller had a chance to go down the field and win the game for Penn State, and he threw an interception. Riley Leonard had a chance to go and seal the game, and it went with 2 quarterback runs and a fantastic 3rd down call where they rolled him out. And he hit Jaden Greathouse on kind of not a broken play per se, but he fit it in a needle rolling left to keep the drive alive and eventually get into field goal range. So look, guys, like, say what you want. If you're going to let those 2 interceptions speak for how you believe his entire performance went, I don't know if there's anything that I'm going to be able to say that's going to change your mind, nor is that my goal. I'm just letting you know Riley Leonard played a really good game in the Orange Bowl. And if he didn't make some of those plays, I don't know if we're sitting here having this conversation.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So, but overall, yes, key number 1, Notre Dame, their team was the better team that night. In the first half, like we said, tale of 2 halves. Andy Kotelnicki had his way a little bit in the first half with Al Golden's defense. And then they came in, they made the adjustments that they needed to, and they held Penn State to -3 rushing yards after allowing 141 in the first half. Held them to -3 rushing yards in the 3rd quarter.
Yeah.
That is a coach being better for that quarter than another coach, right? And from the battle-tested perspective, Notre Dame has played a lot in a lot of games this season, right? So has Penn State. And Notre Dame, I believe that just over the course of their, whatever you want to call it, their playoff run, over the course of the regular season, I think Notre Dame had more opportunities to be battle-tested to where you're just going to naturally see more situations. And they didn't flinch. They turned the ball over. They didn't flinch, right? Their defense was getting gashed in the first half. They never flinched. And so for me, I think our first point was confirmed. What about
you? I'm you explained it perfectly, and I'm not gonna retread everything that we kind of just discussed. So I'm with you on that one. So let's move on to the second reason that Notre Dame will win. They win the good on good matchups, both directly and indirectly. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, Trevor, since I wasn't on that show, can you explain what that means, more specifically the indirectly?
Yeah.
And then whether or not you think Notre Dame was able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as indirectly, the thing that we had talked about was a lot of times we talk about matchups, right? Like Notre Dame's tight ends have to outplay insert team A or B's here, linebackers or safeties. But indirectly is we used the example of the linebackers from the Sugar Bowl. Everybody talked about the Georgia linebackers, rightfully so, right? They had guys like C.J. Allen and Smale Mundin, and I was really high on the Georgia linebackers coming into that matchup. But the indirect matchup is then the Notre Dame linebackers, right? Offset that because they're not indirect because they're not
actually
going against each other on the right.
So like Leonard versus Aller,
yes,
because they're not really going up against each other, but that's a matchup. I got you. Okay.
Yep. So and I believe that they do it. They confirm that one as well, right? And it's a tale of 2 different halves, like I said, and that's going to be a common theme that you guys are going to hear in today's show. But overall, you look at the indirect matchups. I think Riley Leonard outplayed Drew Aller. You know, I think that, especially towards the end of the game, I think Notre Dame's linebackers, granted for some of the mistakes that they made, they brought it together in the second half. And I think in the second half, Notre Dame's linebackers outplayed Penn State's linebackers. Notre Dame's secondary outplayed Penn State's secondary, and I don't really think that there's much of a discussion there. Notre Dame had a receiver go for 7 for 105 and a touchdown, and not a single Penn State wide receiver caught a pass.
Yeah.
So I think that one kind of
well, and you could say wide receiver versus wide receiver is a win for Notre Dame. I mean, however you want to talk about the Penn State wide receivers, they didn't do well in that game. I mean, Notre Dame, and part of that is because I didn't think they were that great to begin with, but part of that is also Notre Dame just locked them down. I mean, Notre Dame's secondary locked down the Penn State receiving corps, locked them down, man. So, I mean,
like it's not like there wasn't an attempt to get them the football,
right?
You know, like they just weren't open.
Correct.
Were not open, and honestly, like to a degree, hats off to Drew Aller for not trying to force anything, right? Because Notre Dame's, yeah. Shout out to Drew Aller for not forcing anything until the game was on the line.
But, right.
Which I guess in this case, from a Notre Dame fan standpoint, still shout out to Drew Aller. But
well played, sir.
Thank you. But you know, I go through and I look at what the matchups were, the good on good matchups, and it was pretty back and forth. You know, I think up until the final drive of the first half, Penn State's defensive line kind of had their way a little bit with Notre Dame's offensive line. And then some, I'm not going to say better, I'm just going to say fresher offensive linemen stepped in, and the narrative changed a little bit, right? And so once that happened and the playing field got a little bit more evened, not from a skill set standpoint, but from just an overall health standpoint, Notre Dame's offensive line kind of started to lean on Penn State's defensive line a little bit. Pass protection went up, right? So for me, I'm going to say that they confirm that too. Just you look at the good on good matchups. The secondary speaks for itself, like I said, against the Penn State wide receivers. So, and also, again, kudos to Penn State because their dudes were also dudes. Nicholas Singleton was a dude. Tyler Warren was a dude. You know, I mean, it was just a really good, it was a really fun, good on good matchup to watch in the Orange Bowl.
Well, and again, if you know, we kind of talked about this in the post game, but if you look at the stats for Penn State offensively, especially the run game, more specifically, you know, I believe both of the running backs had over 80 yards on the ground. I'm like, and they were, you know, -1. Notre Dame was -1 on the turnover ratio. And it's like, you know, so Penn State brought it, man. I mean, especially those running backs, you know, I was very impressed with the Penn State offensive line and what they were able to do. I mean, they were road grading there for a little while. And they were showing how much bigger they were than Notre Dame's defensive line because they just weren't able to get off blocks and they weren't able to use their speed to get into the backfield. And early on, Penn State also did a very good job of mixing up some screen play and some things like that to slow down, you know, what Al Golden wanted to do, you know, bringing linebackers and things of that nature. I mean, they did a very good job of counterpunching and, you know, putting guys where Notre Dame didn't have guys. That's the best way to put it, right? It's a chess match, and Notre Dame was losing that chess match early.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Kotelnicki called a heck of a first half, man. I mean, like he used what Notre Dame's strength was on defense, being aggressive against them, and his screen game was. I mean, I heard nothing but you know just all this praise for the Steve Sarkisian screen game in the Cotton Bowl last night because apparently that's a thing. Maybe I just don't pay enough attention to the Texas Longhorns screen game, but I guess it's really good. I mean. But you want to talk about somebody that was kind of dialing it up and was in his bag in the first half. It was Andy Kotelnicki, man. I mean, he was calling some good plays. They were effective, and obviously they went up 10-0, and it's for a good reason.
Yeah, no, absolutely good point. So let's move on to point number 3, Trevor. And point number 3 was all phases play well. All 3 phases play well. So what say you?
Yeah, I mean, this one's a little bit tougher, right? Because it's tough to say all 3 phases played well for 4 quarters. The reason why we put that in there is because you go back through and you look at the Indiana game, you know, and what the offense did there. And Jeremiah Love gets a 98-yard touchdown. Riley Leonard makes that pass to Jordan Faison at the end of the game to ultimately seal it. He then later punches it into the end zone. Mitch Jeter came back into his normal kicking form, and he went 2 for 3 because one of them got blocked. But again, at that point in time, my confidence in the kicking game was now nowhere close to 2 for 3, right? Let alone attempting 3 field goals. And he came back. And then you go through and you look, the defense obviously did their job. It was 27-3 with 5 minutes left in the game. So, then you talk about the Georgia game. We all know what happened there. They held them to 62 yards on the ground. They held them to 10 points. The offense, it was an ugly game, did what they needed to, right? Made the crucial plays when they had to, capitalized on short fields. And Mitch Jeter, again, hit a couple of good field goals in that game as well. So that is kind of the reason why we put that on there. This one I'm going to kind of leave open and up for debate. And Vince, I'm interested to see what you think about this one, because there were moments where all three phases played well, but the overall play of the defense in the first half, and I mean, really just the overall performance of the team in the first half is going to tough for me to say. It was confirmed that Notre Dame's going to win this game because all three phases play well. But on the flip side of that coin, they won the game because all three phases stepped up when they needed to.
That's fair. That's fair.
So that's why I'm having a little bit of trouble. I'm interested to hear from people in the chat too, like what you guys think about that point too. But I don't know, Vince, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, there. I could point to plenty negatives from offense and defense. Look, I think Notre Dame special teams played well all day. I will say that, start to finish. I thought the coverage teams played very, very well. The one time I think the Penn State wanted to bring the ball out on a kickoff return, they got tackled at about like the 18, or whatever it was. So I mean, that was obviously good, and they didn't even try after that. You had the coverage on the punt. I thought James Rendell did a fantastic job of placing the ball inside the 5-yard line or inside the 10-yard line. I mean, he did a fantastic job. And obviously the coverage unit did a fantastic job as well on punts. I mean, Luke Talich, obviously, on that tackle was unbelievable. So, special team. And then, of course, Mitch Jeter with the 2 field goals, one of which won the game. So, like, that's a huge check mark for the special teams, in my opinion. Offense, they did well in the second half. I thought the adjustments were really well done, and I thought they adjusted better than Penn State adjusted in the second half. And so I give the lean to the offense because of that, because at the end of the day, the Notre Dame offense scored more points in the second half than Penn State did. And when Penn State was dominating, they scored 10. Right. So like I give the lean to the offense, and then I give the lean to the defense too. So, when you can talk about the interception, you can talk about, the fact that they had 2 interceptions that probably still should have been interceptions. So I give the lean to all 3. But the question is, they all have to play well. They played well enough. There's room for improvement, right? I mean, there's definitely room for where I want this team to be. And I'm sure where the coaches want this team to be. They left some stuff out there. So I can't say they played well. They played well enough. So we usually do like a minus, a check, or a plus. I'll give it a check. I'll give it a check here. I can't give it a plus. I would give a plus to special teams. I would give a check to offense and defense. But again, it was good enough. So I'm okay with that. Does that make sense?
Totally. That's why I said I was interested to see where you were on this, because like there's not, outside of special teams, there is not a resounding, this unit played well for even the majority of the game. At best, it was for half of the game for offense and defense. You know what I mean? And so that's where it gets a little bit interesting. That's where it gets a little bit interesting for me, Vince.
Yeah. Yep. Totally get that. So let's move on to number 4. Notre Dame handles adversity the best.
Yeah, man.
This might be the biggest check mark plus whatever of all 5 of these. I'm just saying.
I was about to say, I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. I think it's pretty obvious to say. I mean, you have 2 monumental turnovers by your quarterback. He personally responds to those. The offense responds to those. Your starting left tackle goes down. Your starting right guard goes down. Riley Leonard goes down for the rest of this first half during a 2-minute drill where your backup quarterback comes in and leads you down and puts your first points on the board. Your defense gave up 141 rushing yards in the first half after allowing 62 to Georgia for 60 minutes of gameplay. And they respond with holding Penn State, not even holding Penn State, making them go negative in the third quarter. They went into halftime with 141 rushing yards. Going into the fourth quarter, they had 138, right? So I think this one is a very clear, yes, Notre Dame absolutely handles adversity.
Yeah.
Do you have any other counter thoughts to that?
No.
I suppose.
No. As soon as I read this one, I was like, yeah, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on this. I mean, you can go down the laundry list of ways that Notre Dame handled adversity, not only for themselves in general, but then if you compare it to Penn State, I think they handled it so much better. I mean, as soon as Drew Aller felt adversity, he threw an interception. I mean, there are definite ways in, Penn State secondary felt adversity. Well, two guys fell on their butts on the same play. And gave up the game tying touchdown like that. That's how they responded to adversity. Wasn't good. So yeah, this is a plus if I've ever seen a plus. There's no doubt about it. The final reason for Notre Dame victory, the fifth reason, Notre Dame wins the turnover battle. Well, that didn't really work out so well technically because they were -1 at the end of the day.
Yeah, man. I mean, we put this on there because in all the games leading up to this, Notre Dame had won the turnover margin, right? They're the number one defense in the country in forcing turnovers with now 32 on the season. So this one felt like a comfortable one, right? We talked about what Notre Dame had done in every game, and the streak is still alive. They have still forced at least one turnover in every single game since Northern Illinois. But winning the turnover battle specifically, they did not, which was another reason why I felt like, oh, man, like, I don't know if they're going to be able to pull this one out. Like I wish I was as cool and as calm as collected as some of our other friends, because hats off to Sean Davis, man. He was talking in the post game. He was like, I wasn't worried, man. I was like, dude, good for you. Cause it was not, I was worried until the clock hit 0, man. I was like, just how crazy that game was. Like after they kicked the field goal, Lauren was like, we're going to the Natty. And I'm like, oh, there is 12 seconds left. Look, I don't think anything crazy is going to happen, but I don't know. I'm a wait till the clocks hit 00 kind of guy. But, they didn't win the turnover battle in this one, which I think was a major factor in my unease throughout the majority of this game. Now, I will say the most impactful turnover of the night went to Notre Dame.
Yes. Right? The moment, the place on the field, all of that. Completely agree. Yeah, completely agree.
Yep. So
I wanted to see points off turnovers. Well, let's see here. Points off turnovers, points off. Well, Notre Dame got 10 points off turnovers, apparently. Or no, they gave up 10 points off turnovers. Okay. I'm like, it's weird the way they have it on the stat sheet. And then, of course, Notre Dame had one turnover forced and got 3 points, the very key 3 points. So,
yeah. No, man. I mean, for me, as weird as it sounds, because their turnover itself was crucial, but this one's a minus just because they just flat out didn't win the turnover battle. But their turnover was the most impactful.
That's fair. I think that's a fair argument to make for sure. It's a minus, but their turnover was very impactful. So the 3 biggest concerns that you guys have, this is kind of an interesting set of 3 here. So the first one is offense struggles once again.
Yeah, man. I mean, we were running off of this because the evaluation was we just watched Notre Dame's offense pass for 90 yards. Their offensive line struggled mightily against Georgia. They weren't able to generate any sort of ground game with their running backs. Luckily, Riley Leonard was able to get 80 yards rushing on 14 carries against Georgia. But, again, I was a little concerned with what that was going to look like for Notre Dame in this game because they were going up against another really good defense in Penn State's. And for the first half, it was absolutely a big concern, right? You had a turnover in the first half. Offensive line was a little shaky in the first half. Riley hit some throws in the first half, right? Like that one sideline throw to Mitchell Evans.
To get that first down.
Yeah. I mean, that was in the first half. So there was some good, which did give me a little bit of hope moving forward throughout the game that eventually things were just going to start catching, which it did. But I mean, it was an area of concern for us going into it. So look, I don't really know how we're going to evaluate this. I don't know to give it a plus or a minus. I'll just say that in the first half, that concern came to fruition. And in the second half, it got nullified a little bit because no offense that struggles rattles off 24 second half points, including 17 in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. Right.
So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. Completely agree. I'm with you on that one. Let's move on to number 2, biggest concern. The defense can't handle the Penn State playmakers.
Yeah, it was we were really concerned with being able to handle Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen as a really dynamic 1-2 punch. And then, of course, Tyler Warren's Mr. Do Everything for that offense. I mean, he's catching passes. He's getting separation on routes. He's lining up in the wildcat to run. He's lining up in the shotgun to throw. I mean, they did about everything with him outside of give him an end around, I'm pretty sure. So a fear for us is their game wreckers turned into game wreckers. And to an extent, that was still true a little bit in this game. We talked about Tyler Warren and making him inefficient. If he's going to have 6 receptions for 75 yards, make sure it's on 15 targets, not 7. And unfortunately, he did that in 7 targets, right? When you have opportunities to make tackles, you have to bring them down because they are a really good backfield at getting yards after the catch. And the missed tackles is something that I'm going to get into later in the show, right? And then you go and you talk about the 2 running backs. Nicholas Singleton had 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 in the second half, 1 in the first half, I believe. So, I mean, Penn State's playmakers were playmakers, but I do think Notre Dame was able to handle them. Like contain. I think contain is a better word.
Yes, I agree.
Like
Tyler Warren didn't look. Tyler Warren, to your point, he got his but he didn't hurt Notre Dame. Like he didn't get in the end zone, right? He had 6 catches for 75 yards. Look, that's good for a tight end. Notre Dame's tight end had a decent day too. He had 5 catches for 58 yards. And he had, Tyler Warren had 43 yards after the catch. So like they were, dunk throws for the most part where, he would get yardage afterwards. And obviously, Xavier Watts felt one of those very much so. But then, he also ran the ball. So, I mean, I'll give him credit for that. He had 2 rushes for 21 yards. So he averaged over 10 yards a rush, but he never got into the end zone. That's the biggest one to me. Yeah, Nick Singleton got in the end zone 3 times, but Warren didn't get in the end zone at all. So I feel like they kind of contained him, to a degree. But you're right. He still got his. And so it's like, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. Like, I didn't feel like he really hurt Notre Dame, but he still got, he was still an integral part in what they were trying to do.
Well, and in games like this, when you're playing opponents to this magnitude, right? Like at the end of the day, we're still talking about the college football playoff semifinals, and eventually we're going to start talking about the national championship, right?
Right.
And in games like that, you can't let their game wreckers go off and you can't let them do what Jeremiah Smith did to Oregon, right? Oregon's defense, listen, guys, it's no mystery who they're going to try to get the ball to. It's number 4. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that was a lot of my feelings towards Tyler Warren. You can't let him go do what he did to USC. Now, look, if Notre Dame allowed 17 receptions for 224 yards to one guy, Notre Dame's not playing in a national championship, and we are all very sad in the postgame. But
right.
I think contained, I think, is a better word. Like there were opportunities where Notre Dame had the chance to limit him even more, and they weren't able to do so, unfortunately. But they held him out of the end zone, albeit Singleton had 10 rushing, or he had 3 rushing touchdowns to himself. So this one I'll give a check solely for the point of they still won, right? Like they got theirs. Penn State's playmakers got theirs, and Notre Dame was still able to win. And I think to me, like that's containing somebody, right? It's not letting them take the game over and be total game wreckers. So that's where I am with that one.
Fair enough. I'm with you on that one as well. So this last one, it makes me chuckle because I 100% felt like that was the case in the first half. So the third one is the magic runs out. And the whole first half, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? It was a hell of a run. But there's just not enough magic in the wand down in Miami. Like that's a whole thing. I wasn't even like mad. I mean, I was upset they were losing. I was upset with the way the game was going. But in my mind, I'm just thinking, you know what? The magic wore out. And it didn't.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, it's an interesting conversation to have because unlike past Notre Dame teams, it didn't look like they were ever quitting, or they went into this matchup just believing that they were outmatched. Effort has never been a question with this team, right? Like, I think that's something that we can all agree on. And for us, and for me specifically, a big concern was, I feel like there's been this common theme the last, call it 5-6 Notre Dame games, maybe going back to the Army game, is what is the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? What is that one thing? And in the first half of this football game, we watched Notre Dame starting left tackle, their starting right guard, and their starting quarterback and their starting boundary receiver all leave the game at one point in time, and only one of them came back.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I was like, okay, like, this is it. Like, this is the magic running out. Like, you have to think of all the injuries that they had overcome to get to this point, right? Like, did they use, the last little bit of that magic potion on getting a double-digit win in the Sugar Bowl to get their first New Year's Six bowl win in 31 years, right? So it was a little bit of that to me, honestly.
Yeah.
But it ended up not being true. And and honestly, if anything, it was a little bit of the magic that kind of brought them back.
Yeah.
Mixed in with maximum effort and great halftime adjustments and coaching, right? But you're not going to tell me that Jeremiah Love's touchdown run wasn't magical. Okay.
Right.
Like, that you're not going to tell me him hurdling Kobe King when he was standing straight up wasn't a little bit magical, right? Like, there is a little bit of, you guys see that video online of like the guy that like cooks tomahawk steaks and puts like the flaky salt on it like this. There is a little bit of the magic kind of coming down on Jeremiah Love on that one when he jumped over Kobe King when he was basically standing straight up. So, yeah, to me, and then look, I see a lot of people talking about it in the chat, and my apologies for not bringing this up sooner. You have Notre Dame's backup quarterback comes in a 2-minute drill in a situation where you absolutely need points. And he comes in on the drive and goes 6 for 7, has over 40 yards passing. He converts 3 third downs on that drive.
Yeah.
Like, it's those things. Not only was the fear of the magic being gone eliminated, it's like, okay, so they still have like a good amount of it left in the tank, right? Like, I'm not trying to paint this picture that if Notre Dame somehow wins a national championship, it's all because of pure luck and magic and it's the luck of the Irish, and no, not at all. But it's it leaves room for hope, right? Because there was a little bit of thought of, is this it? Like, is this is what kind of breaks it for him. This is what broke the back. So that one, I think it's clear it was proved myth busted. We'll say that.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's absolutely fair. All right, so that's going to do it for part 1 of our Upon Further Review. So make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and of course, jump on the boards@irishbreakdown.com. There's going to be all kinds of good stuff on there when we turn the page to Ohio State, which will be tomorrow or Monday. There's going to be stuff, obviously, on the website, on the boards, but you're not going to know unless you're on the boards. That's boards.irishbreakdown.com. So you want to make sure that you head on over there. All kinds of good stuff, good content. And, make sure you head over there. So boards.irishbreakdown.com. Trevor, let's jump into the offensive keys to victory revisited. So we're going to talk offense here and what we saw and whether it, lived up to the billing and all of those different things. And of course, the first offensive key is always the same. And I got to tell you, this might be the biggest minus that we're going to talk about today. And it's start fast. And I would say that in no world, in no analysis, could you come up with an explanation of how they actually did start fast in this game, because they did not.
No, this one, I don't think there's a whole lot of room for debate here. This one's a resounding minus, right? They started out the game punt, interception, punt.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and on their interception drive, it was 3 plays for -2 yards. Mm-hmm. So it's not even like that there was like a lot of momentum and it killed the momentum. I mean, it was a rough drive, right? I mean, first drive, like, they actually moved the ball relatively decent on the first drive. It was 8 plays, 48 yards in their first offensive possession. And I was like, okay, hey, maybe they're going to knock out the starting fast key. And then drive came to a halt.
Yes.
And it didn't look much better until the start of until that 2-minute drive. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a resounding minus for me, Vince. I assume you were in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, look, they put 3 points on the board the entire first half, and obviously, it came with it was the last play of the half, and so that is the exact opposite of starting fast. They did move the ball, like you said, a little bit on the first drive, but then it stopped and halted, and it was like, oh, all right, this is going to be a little bit of a slugfest here. And then the second drive was awful. And the third drive wasn't a whole lot better. I mean, it was 8 plays, but they only gained 24 yards on those 8 plays. And then you had the other drive. So, I mean, there's only 4 drives in the first half for Notre Dame. I mean, you had 2 in the first quarter and you had 2 in the second quarter, and that's it. And you punted twice, you turned it over once, and you kicked a field goal. Like, that is the exact opposite of starting fast. The only thing that would have been worse is if they had 0 points. I mean, it's at least they got the 3, which obviously was huge, in the grand scheme of things, but that is the exact opposite of starting fast. So this is a giwandous minus. Okay. I'm making up words and I don't care.
I'm adding that one to my repertoire.
I mean, it was a huge minus, man.
That's it. If we go live tomorrow, I will drop in a giwandous at some point. You better believe it.
Yes.
You better believe it.
All right, let's move on to the second offensive key to victory, and that was control the line of scrimmage. Obviously did not start out very well, Trevor.
No, again, you want to talk about the definition of tale of two halves, right? Notre Dame ended the first half with 15 rushing yards on 13 carries, right? Jeremiah Love had 3 touches for 10 yards. His longest rush was 5. Jadarian Price had 2 rushes for 8 yards, with his longest rush being 12, if that tells you anything, right? But then you go and you flip the script to the second half. Notre Dame had 101 rushing yards in the second half of that football game, right? And it was due to a lot of the adjustments that they made, which we're going to dive into once we start breaking down the offense here. But for me, I'll give this one a check, because I thought the pass protection early on, like in the game, it faltered a little bit, but at no point in that football game was it ever as bad as it was in moments against Georgia, right? So for me, this one's getting a check, because you don't go from having 15 rushing yards to ending with 116 if adjustments aren't made and you start moving the line of scrimmage and controlling the line of scrimmage. So I am okay with if somebody wants to give this a negative or a minus as well. I also totally understand that one. But for me, the adjustments that were made to save it is a big reason for me why I believe that this one's a check.
No, I'm okay with the check here, because I think almost the second half balances out the first half. And if it's even, it's a check for me. And I think it was somewhat even, but Notre Dame controlled it when they needed to, right? Like that first drive coming out of halftime. I mean, they ran the ball, I think, 3 straight times right up the middle, with different scheme than what they were doing, because they were doing pin and pull and tackle wrap and some other things. But I mean, they just drove right down the field, boom, 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 right? And, a lot of that had to do with what they were doing up front, and with 2 backup linemen. And I realized one of those guys wasn't supposed to be a backup, but he ended up being a backup because of injury. So, I'm in the check area, because, like I said, I think one half balances out the other half. And so I think I'm in the check area as well. The first half was pretty darn bad, though. That's the problem.
That's why I said, like, if
yeah.
This one would have been an easier check for me if Notre Dame had like 45 to 50 rushing yards at half. 15's tough.
Right. Yeah, I agree. All right. Third key to victory revisited is be more aggressive, tempo, and play calling.
Hear me out here, man. I'm willing to give this one a plus. I really am. I am. So here's why. Notre Dame, from an early standpoint, wanted to set the tone that they were willing to push the ball down the field, and that was something that they didn't show that they were willing to do against Georgia. I also think that they didn't have the ability to do it against Georgia because pass protection was not holding up, right? But in the first half, I think that they were trying to push the ball down the field a little bit. I think pass protection was once again an issue early in the game, but you had that play to Mitchell Evans in the first half up the sideline where he made that contested catch, right? You had some plays that were like that. And then for me in the second half, I thought it got extremely aggressive once they were able to get their offensive line, get their feet back under them. Riley came back in the game, so their original game plan that they had could come to fruition a little bit. But then you start looking at some of the shots that Riley Leonard himself was willing to take, right? I mean, on a third down situation where he's getting pressured, he isn't able to finish his throwing motion. Look, for those of you who don't understand, that is a really hard pass to make, right? If you're not able to fully step into your throw and finish your release, Riley Leonard stopped his throwing motion when he was like right here. Like he wasn't able to finish and follow through, gave Jaden Greathouse a one-on-one opportunity, back shoulder, and he was able to complete it, right? On their first scoring drive, they sent a true freshman running back on a sluggo route against a linebacker, and he won that matchup as well. Riley Leonard also had another really beautiful, it was like a wheel route / like stop fade to Eli Raridan when he was called for when he got the pass interference.
When he got PI'd,
yeah. So look, this is another one of those that I will also listen to check because of how the first half went out. But to me, this was a completely different style of aggressive play calling in comparison to what we saw in the Sugar Bowl. And then with the tempo piece, they went to it a lot more in the second half. First drive of the second half, they went tempo. And because they started to find a little groove and they stuck with it and they drove right down the field and they scored a touchdown, right? That drive took, give me a second here. That first drive of the second half, 8 plays, 75 yards, 4 minutes and 14 seconds off the clock. So, wasn't a 2-minute drill by any means, but for me, I really, really like the aggressiveness of the second half. That, and I mean, the coaching interviews, I'm in the same boat as you, but there was heavy emphasis with Marcus Freeman talking about how they need to stay aggressive, have to stay aggressive. After the third quarter, we have to stay aggressive. This game isn't over until there's double zeros on the clock. So for me, how about this? We'll go with check plus for this one because I'm willing to hear out both sides.
Yeah, I get that. It's funny because it depends on how you look at this, because I do think Notre Dame did a good job of having some aggressive play calling and really kind of attacking him. And look, we talked about it in the first part, right? Riley Leonard was trying to be aggressive. That's why he threw an interception. That first interception was because Riley Leonard was trying to be aggressive. I don't want to take that away from him. I don't want him to not be aggressive. So I do think they were trying to be aggressive. I think Penn State was trying to be more aggressive offensively, but that's not what we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, we're talking about Notre Dame specifically. I think offensively, Penn State was more aggressive than Notre Dame was with the tempo and some different things that they were trying to do to keep Notre Dame on their heels defensively. And I thought they did a really good job of it, specifically in the first half. But when Penn State when they went no huddle and they went tempo and they went fast, I mean, they always go no huddle, but like when they went tempo, it affected Notre Dame. It did. I think they got a nice counterpunch in the second half, but in the first half, it definitely affected them defensively. So I thought Ohio State. See, I'm already on my mind. I thought Penn State was more aggressive offensively than Notre Dame was, but to this point, being aggressive, we're talking about Notre Dame, and I think they were. So I'm okay with a check plus here. I probably am trending more towards the check than the plus, but I'm okay with a check plus. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. The fourth offensive key to victory was the pass game has to improve. And obviously this was coming off of the 90-yard performance, against Georgia and everybody saying, they can't win a game like that and blah, 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 which obviously is completely untrue, but whatever. Your thoughts on the pass game improving?
Yeah. I mean, if we're just talking about improving from the Georgia game, I'm giving it a plus because they went from 90 to 223. Right. For this game specifically, I'm check. I'll hear out check plus. Look, Riley Leonard, I think, played really well, and he was a major leading factor as to why they won this football game.
Mm-hmm.
You can also make the argument that he is also one of the reasons why this game was in doubt for a little bit, right? Like throwing an interception with 10 minutes left in the football game, that's iffy, right? Like the pass game improved. There was an emphasis to give your receivers a chance to go up and win one-on-one battles. There was an emphasis to push the ball down the field vertically. But the reason why I'm not going to give this like a plus, look, if you take away the interceptions, I'm willing to give this a plus because that was the most consistent I've seen Notre Dame try to attack vertically down the field all season long. And just because because my mental health always has to be in question, they waited until the semifinals of the college football playoff to do it. But I guess if there's going to be any other time, it's then. But look, I think the interceptions that Riley Leonard threw set it back a little bit, but there's no doubt that there was improvement in the pass game. There's a lot of improvement in the pass game with a lot left to be desired, right? There were some things. There was still meat on the bone in this. It's a good foundation. Like there are some people that walked away from watching this that said like, this is the best Notre Dame's pass game can be. And I don't believe that to be true. I really don't. But there are some things that can be, there are more things that can be capitalized on in the national championship. I'm not like, that's not based on opponent. Like that could have been the case for if Notre Dame played Ohio State or if they played Texas. It's just Notre Dame from an execution standpoint. There are some other things that they could have done if things like pass protection held up. Riley missed a couple of throws downfield later in the game that they could have capitalized on. So, but for me, for improvement, if we're just talking about improvement, that's a check plus. But for that game specifically, I'm giving the pass game a check.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's absolutely fair. I mean, obviously he did better than 90 yards. He completed 65% of his passes. He had over 200 yards throwing. Anytime Riley Leonard, like this is where I've gotten to, and I think it's a realistic view of things. Anytime he's over 200 yards passing, I think that's a good day. For Riley Leonard, I think that's where you kind of want him to be. And he had 35 yards on the ground. It's a little lower than I would like it to be perfectly honest, but not by much. For me, it's like, okay, I want him to be, over 200 yards passing, over like 40 yards rushing, and be responsible for 3 touchdowns. He was responsible for 2. He was over 200 in through the air and 35 on the ground. So he was in the neighborhood. It's definitely improved, right? I mean, they improved on the pass game. That's what it says. Pass game has to improve. It improved, but there's still meat on the bone, right? So that's why it's a check for me as well. It's not really a check plus. You know what? I'm going to change it. It is a check plus because he also outplayed Aller in the pass game. And I can't completely hold the 2 interceptions against him because there was more football than just that.
Sure.
They scored on the 1 turnover for sure. And I get that, but at the same time, it's like, I'm going to go check plus because he did better than he usually does. And he outplayed Drew Aller. And so that's why it's a check plus for me. So, that's where I'm at.
Love it.
Okay. Let's flip it over to the defense and talk about those keys to victory, revisit those a little bit. So the first one was dominate up the middle. Thoughts on that one?
Again, it's the same thing that we talked about with controlling the line of scrimmage for Notre Dame. It was a tale of 2 halves, right? I mean, at Penn State had, let me see here, 141 rushing yards at halftime, and they finished the game with 204. So they more than cut in half what Penn State did in the first half in the second. And dominating up the middle, it's 2-phased, right? Like it's also talking about run and pass game. And this one for me, based on what the outcome was in the first half and what the outcome was in the second half, I'm willing to call it a wash and just give it a check because second half adjustments were great. I thought the linebacker blitzes in the first half were not timed well. I think that Penn State did some things with their cadence to mess with that a little bit because they were walking up to the line. Like the Notre Dame linebackers were walking up to the line and there was no question about it. They were doing their like AA gap blitz that they do with their linebackers.
Sure.
And it was just the things that Penn State was doing with their cadence was messing with them a little bit, if I'm just being 100% honest. Second half, I thought the blitzes were timed up significantly better. Jack Kaiser had a couple of crucial ones. At the end of the game, when Jack Kaiser, it was when Drew Aller had to scramble on 3rd down and Jack Kaiser and Bryce Young tackled him on the Penn State sideline over there to force a punt to give Notre Dame the ball back on their second to last possession of the game.
That was massive.
That was a perfectly timed blitz from Jack Kaiser. And then again, when you talk about the run game, honestly, a lot of the success that Penn State had in the run game was to the perimeter. It wasn't necessarily up the middle, but they mixed it up. You know, they didn't just solely attack on the perimeter. They did some things. So I'm going to give it a check, and I'm kind of splitting hairs here between first half and second half. So in the same conversation that I'm talking about controlling the line of scrimmage for Notre Dame's offense, I gave that a check. I'm also going to give this one a check as well.
I like it. Let's move on to defensive key to victory revisited number 2. And that was have a Tyler Warren plan. This is an interesting one because I'm very curious to see where you go with this.
Well, here's my takeaway after I've now watched the game like 3 times, obviously initially when it happened, and then I watched it on Friday morning, and then I watched it this morning. I think I genuinely, I think they had a plan. I just think there was a lapse in execution in some of it. I do. There was an emphasis to roll down the safeties and have one of Adon Schuler, Xavier Watts, or Rod Hurd be shaded over Tyler Warren. I thought Notre Dame had multiple opportunities to make plays on him in the backfield. I mean, there was one play where there was one play where Tyler Warren lined up in the shotgun. I thought he was going to run it, and it was a pass play. He scrambled out. Jaden Osbury had an opportunity to tackle him 8 yards in the backfield, and Tyler Warren ended up running it for an 8-yard gain. Right. So to me, I look at that. That's a 16-yard swing. Right. So I think there was a plan. I don't think that it was executed well. And the reason why I'm saying I fully believe that there was a plan, 1, I watched the game 3 times. And 2, Al Golden is smart enough to not just say, yeah, we'll just kind of let 44 do his thing. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I'm at with this one. I'm going to give this one a check for a lot of the reasons that we had talked about. I thought they did a decent job at containing him. Yeah, like you don't stop a player like Tyler Warren. Yeah. Right? I mean, like Ohio State secondary did a pretty good job against him in the past game, but then Tyler Warren ended up being that team's leading rusher. So, like, it's just like, how do you contain a dynamic guy like that? And I don't want to make it sound like he rushed for 100 yards, like for some of our Ohio State fans that are listening. It's just he led the team in rushing with 47 yards off of 3 carries. Right? Correct. So it's just he finds so many different ways to hurt you. I thought they did a good job of identifying wherever he was on the field. That was going to be a big game of where's Waldo. But, yeah, man, I'll give it a check because Tyler Warren didn't have any plays in this game, in my opinion, that completely broke it open for Penn State. That's where I'm at with it. Vince, yeah. What about you?
They had a plan. And I think, before I really dove into it and was looking at it, like, yes, he was the best player that they had, and they were clearly doing things to get him the football and, all of that. I thought Penn State might have overdone it a little bit when, like, they would line him up in the Wildcat or whatever wild lion or whatever crap they call it. And it was like, and then they would motion out of it. And it was in down and distance scenarios where you're not going to the Wildcat. It was like 3rd and long. Like, it's not going to happen. So, like, what are you doing? Like, it was too much. To me, it was too much. And I think they did have a plan. You're right. They didn't execute it at all times, but they kept him out of the end zone. Like, he didn't hurt you on the scoreboard, which is what I was nervous about. Right. And he didn't. He had the one, they had the one big long play where, he dropped it in the bucket there on the in zone coverage, which was a great throw and catch, no doubt about it. But that was a mess. That was a mix-up by Notre Dame. Like, he should have never been that wide open. It was, I think it was Drake Bowen that was trailing on that one. It shouldn't have happened, right? And so you can't really blame Al Golden because there was a plan in place. He should have been covered, but he wasn't. So I think they had a plan. So I'm going to give it a check. It's not a minus because he didn't score. But he got some stats, I mean, he did rush the ball twice. He only carried the ball twice. Like, I think that's a win if you're Notre Dame because you had them in a position where putting him at quarterback for him to run the ball, and I use that air quote wise for the people on the podcast, putting him back there didn't benefit them a whole lot, especially in the second half because they were in down and distance where that's not going to work. And so he only carried the ball twice. he's carried the ball a lot more than that in other games because they've had a lot of moving the stick, short yardage situations where giving him the ball makes a lot of sense. And so in that regard, I think they had a win there. They had a W, right? So this is a situation where he's such a good player that you're not going to shut him down. You have to contain him. I thought they did a decent job of containing him. That's why it's a check. It's not a check plus.
I like it.
Okay. All right. Third defensive key to victory revisited was be disciplined against the backs. How do you feel about this one? Yeah, the long sigh kind of says it all.
Yeah, if I'm being honest with you, I'm giving this one a minus for a couple of reasons. One, the two backs combined for 205 all-purpose yards and 3 touchdowns. And that, to me, that's tough. Both running backs went over 80 yards. Nicholas Singleton had 84 and 15 carries, and Katron Allen had 82 off of 19 carries. Nicholas Singleton had 3 rushing and it was an efficient day for them. Let me put it that way, too. Like, it's not like they had one run of 60 yards. And no, I mean, Nicholas Singleton had 84 rushing yards on 15 carries, and his longest run of the day was 13 yards. Right. I mean, Nicholas Singleton also in the pass game, you have to be aware of where he's at all times. He had 2 catches for 33 yards.
Yeah.
So, that combined with the only touchdowns that they scored were by way of their running backs, one in particular. So for this one, I'm giving it a minus. I'm also giving it a minus because, to me, be disciplined against the backs I think tackling is filed under discipline. And Notre Dame had 4 missed tackles the entire game against Georgia. They had 15 against Penn State. And for me, like I said, I file tackling under discipline. So, and they were not they did not have a lot of success bringing him down on first contact. So, yeah, for me, this one's a minus. Vince, what about you, man?
Yeah, I mean, the backs were the 2 best players, from a production standpoint, especially Nicholas Singleton, in this game. So yeah, it's a minus. I mean, they didn't do a great job of containing those 2, especially in the pass game. Nick Singleton, I mean, if he didn't raise his draft stock in that game, everybody was talking about how Drew Aller was going to have to be able to raise his draft stock in this game. He wasn't the Penn State guy that did that. That was Nicholas Singleton. And I say that to also acknowledge the fact that the Carter kid was already a top draft pick. So I don't know if he could have done a whole lot more to help himself out. I think he was the 2nd rated, draft pick coming into the game. Maybe he's number 1 now, but he's not a quarterback. So, I guess we'll see what happens. But the person I think that did the most to help himself out was Nicholas Singleton. I think he had a great game. He had a great game. Showed he had good hands, ran the ball hard, had good vision. I mean, he played a really good game. So yeah, this is a minus for me as well. Those 2 backs played well. Still didn't have 100 yards, but Nicholas Singleton got in the end zone 3 times. I mean, it's like, and he had 2 catches for 33. So I mean, he was all over the field.
Yeah, I mean, he held him to under 100 yards rushing, but he had 100 total yards and 3 touchdowns, and that's just. He was one. Now, there is some truth, I will say, on the flip side of this coin. There is some truth to when your wide receivers have 0 catches for 0 yards, those have to go somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, if Penn State's putting up 24 points in a game where their wide receivers have 0 catches and 0 yards, that production has to go somewhere if you're putting it in the end zone. And, the running backs obviously accounted for that. But I will say Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, especially on the ground, had very, very efficient days. So, yeah, you and I are both on the same page with minus here.
Love it. Love it. All right, the final defensive key to victory was harass Aller all game long. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so this one's tough, right? Because I don't think they harassed him all game long. I think it got significantly better in the second half. So if we're talking about all game long, I'm giving it a check. If we're only evaluating this from the second half, I'd be willing to give it a check plus. But it wasn't consistent throughout. I thought Drew Aller early was, he was playing fine. I mean, well, he wasn't playing fine early. He was 5 of 13 for 53 yards at half. He had some accuracy issues.
Correct.
And that was without the Notre Dame pressure, if I'm just being 100% honest, evaluating it from where it was. But yeah, I'll give this one a check because of the tale of two different halves here. It's interesting because like I need to find the disparity between some of these stats here, because ESPN's box score has Notre Dame tallying 1 sack and Pro Football Focus had them tallying 4. And I know they didn't have 4 sacks.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know.
The official stats that we got, like the live stats at Notre Dame for 1.
Yeah, so. It was definitely 1. It was definitely 1. But towards the second half, they started to get pressure in his face a little bit. The blitzes started getting a little bit closer to home. They were able to harass him, get a hand in his face a little bit, which ultimately is one of the – I mean, Jalen Snead's pressure is what forced that interception. It was a bad decision. You never throw back across the middle late. That's a cardinal sin for quarterbacks. And Jalen Snead had really good pressure to get that ball out as well. And it forced the throw high. Drew Aller even said in his postgame press conference that he was trying to dirt it. He was trying to throw it at their feet, which to be honest with you, I do think that he was trying to, but Jalen Snead ran in with pressure, hand ups, which caused him not to be able to step into the throw. He sailed it. So that's where I'm at. So I'm giving it a check because per the wording, it was harass him all game long. And it was not all game long, but it was 4.5. So that one I'm willing to give it a check. What about you?
No, I think that's fair. I mean, they did enough because here's what I'll say. Physically harassing him is one thing, but then also harassing him in here between the ears with what the secondary was doing, I think is also a legitimate argument to make. Look, the Notre Dame secondary was elite in this game. I mean, they had Penn State blanketed and they had 0 yards to their wide receivers, 0 yards, 0 catches to the wide receivers. So I think they were harassing Aller mentally as well. And you're right. He did have accuracy issues. I think part of that was the thought of pressure. I think part of that was the coverage by the back end for Notre Dame. So I think all of that kind of goes into this, to be honest with you. And maybe I'm cheating a little bit by saying, being harassed is a mental thing as well. But I mean, you played quarterback. When you drop back and you're looking for somebody that's open and all you see are white shirts blanketing the blue shirts, it's like, what do I do? And that kind of forces some inaccuracy. It forces some, happy feet in the pocket, all of those different things. So I'm going to give it a check. I'm not going to give it a plus, but I'm going to give it a check. And because it wasn't all game, but it was the majority of the game. And like I said, I think part of it was mental as well. And I think they did a pretty good job of that. So, yeah, I give it a check. I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, and there's a lot of these, right? Like it's the one thing that's so tough is when you go through and like when you talk about keys to victory and keys to victory revisited, it's so tough to talk about like if they did or did not do something because at the end of the day they won, right? But there's individual facets of this that like they did not do, right? Like, I mean, controlling the running backs, they did not. Start fast, they did not. But all in all, they were still able to win, man, and that's the most important thing.
Oh, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Okay, so that's going to do it for part 2, excuse me, of our Upon Further Review. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends, and of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. There's going to be all kinds of stuff up there pertaining to Penn State, but then also pertaining to Ohio State. So you're going to want to check out the breakdowns and then, of course, the predictions and everything else that we're going to be bringing to you over the next 10 days of fun and excitement. So make sure you hit that notification bell and make sure you get on the boards because there's all kinds of good stuff over there. So boards.irishbreakdown.com is where you want to be. All right, Trevor, we got one final part to discuss. And I think we got plenty of time to do it. So part 3 is going to be we're going to go offense first, then we're going to go defense. And it's going to be, okay, we watched the film. What did we take out of the film, now that we watched it, in addition to what we already kind of discussed on the post-game show? And sometimes that could be a little bit tough to come up with because post-game shows are like 3.5 hours long. But there is some stuff that we want to discuss on both sides of the ball. So we're going to jump into this thing. Trevor, I will let you take the wheel here. And I believe there's a good amount of stuff here to talk about, but I will let you take the wheel, and you can start off wherever you want, and we'll just kind of let the conversation go.
Yeah, so yeah, it's tough, right? Because we did cover a lot in the post game for all the right reasons. Everybody was juiced up. Notre Dame got their second New Year's Six bowl win, and I mean, even if you take out the New Year's Six bowl win on top of it, that was a crazy football game, man.
Yes, it was.
That was a crazy football. It took years off my life.
Agreed.
And the biggest one that I'm going to watch in my lifetime now is in a week from Monday. But with that being said, there were some players that stood out on film that I believe that we didn't touch a whole lot on in the post game because we were covering so much stuff, right? And the first one for me was Mitchell Evans. Mitchell Evans, I have been one of his biggest critiques this year. I can fully own that because there's a lot of hype, right? And I think it did get overshadowed a little bit that he missed spring. He was recovering from his ACL tear against Texas A&M. He was only 9 months removed from it. But, you started hearing that, hey, this is the healthiest he's ever felt. And this is, him coming back to true form. And I do think that there was some truth to that. But I think then the mental aspect, Vince, to what you were talking about in the previous segment, I think that is what took a little bit of time to get caught back up with him. And I think in this one, after going back through and watching film, Mitchell Evans, from a route running perspective, I'm not saying he's back and we're getting ready to watch what he did against Duke and Ohio State last year. Now, if he would like to replicate
that would be okay by me.
That's cool with me too, man.
Yeah.
That is A-okay with me. But Mitchell Evans was coming off the line with purpose. It was one of his best games of the season. He was running really crisp routes.
Yeah.
He fired off the line of scrimmage. One of my biggest complaints with him is in certain plays when he knew he wasn't getting the football, I questioned whether he was running his routes to the fullest of his ability. And in this game against Penn State, whether he knew he was getting the football or not, he ran a really good route every time. Mitchell Evans had one of his better games in a Notre Dame uniform. Despite what the stat sheet might show, there's a reason he was targeted 9 times. And players like that don't get targeted 9 times if they're not doing what they need to on every single rep. And like you said before, a lot of talk is going to go to Tyler Warren and what he was able to do in the Orange Bowl. Mitchell Evans was not far behind him.
Yeah.
Mitchell Evans was 1 catch and 17 yards away from having the exact same performance through the air that Tyler Warren had. So that's why I'm saying there's a lot left to be desired with Notre Dame's passing game. There's still some meat on the bone. He was targeted 9 times. For the most part, the pass game was efficient. Like I said, Jaden Greathouse had 7 catches on 7 targets. Aeneas Williams had 5 catches on 5 targets. But Mitchell Evans, for me, was a guy that popped out, and he was running with a little bit of purpose in the Orange Bowl, Vince. I don't know if you caught any of that, but
that was great. I mean, it was good to see because he's an absolute weapon that Riley Leonard can use. I mean, and he obviously did use him in this game because, I think he had 5 catches for 58 yards in this game. And so, he definitely helps you out. And if the wide receivers then do kind of what they did in this game and you have Mitchell Evans, like all of a sudden the passing game opens up and you can't just key in on the run game. So Mitchell Evans being at the top of his game is going to be huge in this next game as well, but it was nice to see it in this game. But I absolutely agree with you. This is a bit of a different Mitchell Evans than we've seen for most of the year. And you know what? If you save it for the last 2 games of the year, I guess I'm okay with that because of the way things are trending right now. So, hats off to Mitchell Evans. How about Tosh Baker? What did you see from him when he came into the game?
Yeah, I mean, Tosh Baker came in. He was in there. He went in with like 13 minutes left in the second quarter. So he played a good amount of football. Like, I mean, the majority of the game. And the thing that I really appreciated was with Mike Denbrock, the first play that they ran when Tosh Baker came in the game was a sprint out right, and they rolled the protection. They almost peeled it back to almost – it was almost a play call to me that seemed to, like, get Tosh Baker's feet wet. Like, you know what I mean?
Right. It's kind of like handing the ball off when the quarterback comes in,
yeah,
or something like that. Not that Notre Dame did that in this game, but, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Right. Like, first play you're in, and you're matched up against denied Dennis Sutton, and coming off of not going through warmups as the starter. You weren't expecting to step in at any point in this game. Now, he was prepared to do it, but not saying that that was necessarily the expectation. But the thing that I love that what Mike Denbrock did is he catered to, hey, let's get your feet wet a little bit here. We're going to peel the protection back. We're going to roll it. We're going to sprint out Riley Leonard to the right, away from the side of the offensive line that just had a new guy step in, right? I'm not going to dive too much into Tosh Baker because we gave him a lot of flowers on the post-game show. Rightfully so, man. Like he was a kid that lost his starting position to a true freshman, and when his number was called, he came in and he performed with a high level of effort. There were some plays that he won and some plays that he lost. If he's going to be the guy, he's going to be going up against one of JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer, and that is not an easy task for your first start since actually he started in the bowl game.
He started in the bowl game, but still over a year. I mean,
yeah,
he hasn't played football in a year. Like,
right.
So your point still is accurate. Okay, so let's stay on the offensive line. I know you kind of want to talk about Billy and Jagasaw.
Yeah, as well. Yeah. Billy Schrouth, I think, encompassed the tale of two halves. I think he ended up being. Let me go back through and check, but he ended up being the second highest graded pass blocker for Notre Dame in this game. He graded out at 83.4 per Pro Football Focus. He allowed 0 hurries, 0 pressures on the quarterback, no hits on the quarterback. But his play in the first half was not great. Penn State was doing, the small lineman games that they would run is that they would slant their defensive tackles a little bit. Like they were moving Abdul Carter all around the line of scrimmage. And Billy Schrouth struggled with that in the first half. He did. But man, he played so well in the second half. He did. He was somebody that stepped up majorly. And I mean, sticking with the theme of people that stepped up, Charles Jagasaw came in and he was an absolute dude. I mean, there was one play where he pulled and absolutely decimated a linebacker.
Yep.
That was fun fact. That was Brian called me to tell me this, so I can't even take credit for it. Because I was watching it on film, I was like, the play was awesome, but something didn't look right. And it's because he pulled to the wrong side.
Is that what happened? Is that why his guy came completely clean?
Yes. He pulled to the
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, it was a trap play, but he ran it like a counter.
Oh my gosh.
And so
but he depleted the crap out of that guy on the end.
Right. And so my biggest gripe with the offensive line against Georgia was not only were you making mistakes, you were making mistakes not going 100 miles an hour. And Charles Jagasaw, I mean, it was his first meaningful, like he was on PAT and the field goal unit against Georgia, but like I'm talking first meaningful run blocking or pass blocking snaps since the Oregon State game.
Correct.
Right. And mistakes were going to happen. Right. And in that Oregon State game, he was the starting left tackle, not right guard.
Correct. Yes.
And so mistakes were going to be made. But here's the thing. If you're going to do it, if you're going to make a mistake, take a pair of cleats with you. You know what I mean? and man, that is exactly what he did. And at the end of the night, Charles Jagasaw ended up grading out as the #1 pass blocker for Notre Dame.
Okay.
He was in for 28 pass blocking snaps and allowed 0 sacks, 0 hits on the quarterback, 0 hurries, and 0 pressures.
Okay.
So Charles Jagasaw came in and he replaced Rocco Spindler. And look, there's going to be a lot of conversation going on this week around what the offensive line is going to look like. I'm under the impression, here's what I think should happen, because I'm not on the coaching staff. I don't live close enough to South Bend to go see a practice for like an hour. Right. But I think Notre Dame needs to make a decision early on of who their starting lineup on the offensive line is going to be.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because people are asking, and so I figured you and I could discuss this a little bit as well, because of, we don't know what the injury status is of the two guys that came out. All we know is what you guys know at this point, is that, Knapp was in street clothes in the second half. I don't know. They didn't show Rocco on the TV copy, to my knowledge. At least I didn't see it. And so I don't know. I don't know what's going on with those two. And so I guess we kind of have to wait and see whenever Notre Dame has their press conference as to what's going on. But let's throw a couple of scenarios. Okay, Trev. First scenario, both guys are still out. Do you just roll with the lineup that you had?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was proven, like, very rarely do you lose your starting left tackle and your starting right guard, and the offensive line play as a unit improves. And we got a firsthand glimpse at that in the Notre Dame Penn State game. So if both guys are deemed not to go, you go Tosh at left tackle and you go Jagasaw at right guard.
Okay. If obviously if Rocco can't go, then Jagasaw is your second or is your right guard. Okay. So if Knapp is back, then obviously Tosh takes a back seat. Knapp is good, and you keep Jagasaw in there. I think the most interesting scenario to discuss, if Rocco's healthy, Knapp is not, what do you do?
Me personally, I'm moving Jagasaw to left tackle.
Me too.
I am, because I think that gives you your best look. Right. I know Tosh Baker started against Oregon State, but that was at right tackle. And they made the conscious decision during that week of bowl prep to move Jagasaw to left tackle in place of Tosh Baker, to then move Tosh to right tackle when Blake Fisher also announced that he was declaring for the draft. Right. So for me, that's what I'm doing. And I think now you're having a conversation of, I'm putting skill set aside out of this. Everybody knows what Charles Jagasaw's ceiling is. I think we can all agree upon that. And we, again, got to see his tenacity as a blocker. We got to see what he's able to do when he's on the football field. I cannot emphasize this enough. As a fan and as somebody that loves this team, I cannot thank Rocco Spindler enough for the job that he has done this season.
Sure.
But that kid right now is playing on
one ankle. He's playing on one ankle, period. End of discussion. That's what's happening. And he's gutting it out, and he's doing the best that he can. And I know this is going to kind of parlay later on to some other stuff we want to talk about with Rocco, but he's playing on one ankle. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to change in the next 10 days.
No, I don't either, man. No, I don't either. And that's what's so tough, right? Because, like, you want to give the kid his flowers, and you want to talk about somebody that gave this team specifically everything that he had, and he did. But now there needs to be a question around the effectiveness of what it's like when you're on the football field. And there was a clear elevation in play on right guard when Rocco wasn't in. And it's not because Rocco sucks. Like, it's not because he's a bad offensive lineman. It's because the guy that replaced him was healthy. Mm-hmm. It's the guy that was, like, Rocco had in the run game. He had really good initial hands, a really good punch, and there was no leg drive behind it because he has one ankle.
Right. He can't anchor. Right. That's the key word for an offensive lineman. You can't anchor. You're not going to be effective.
Right. Yeah. And that's what's so tough, right? Like, and you hate to see it for somebody that has put the program before himself. Mm-hmm. All season long. He was named not the starter when he was in 2023, when he came into camp in 24. He stepped in with pride and dignity when he went in and his number was called when Shrouth ended up going down against Purdue. But at the end of the day, it's the national championship, and now you have to have a serious conversation of what is the effectiveness going to be when you're on the field. You know, players, and this is not specific to Rocco Spindler, players can say all the time that I'm 100%, I'm good to go. And it's like, respectfully, sometimes when the stuff on film says otherwise, who knows? You know what I mean? But for me, like, I think in ideal scenarios for all the ones that you gave, if neither of them are healthy, you keep the offensive line the same as it was in the second half against Penn State. If Knapp is not good to go, but Rocco is, you put Jagasaw at left tackle. And I will say, if Rocco is legitimately healthy enough to go, but Knapp isn't, I do think that the outlook of Jagasaw at left tackle and Rocco at right guard is better than Tosh at left tackle and Jagasaw at right guard. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that offensive line, barring Rocco Spindler being at full health, is a better outlook than the latter. But, you know, you go through and you look, and the play that Riley Leonard went out with a concussion and had to sit out on the sideline was the same play that Rocco got hurt. Yep.
Identical play. Yep. Or exactly the same one. Yeah.
And it's because he got driven back pretty far into the backfield and ended up on his back. And that's when he hurt his ankle again, because, like, there was just to your point, Vince, there was no anchoring. He didn't have the physical ability to do it. Because I went back and looked, and I was like, oh, maybe he got rolled up on that play, and maybe not, like, he tried to anchor on his bad ankle and he couldn't. So who knows what that's going to look like in the national championship, because now you're going to be going up against a Tyleik Williams. You could be going around, looping around Jack Sawyer or JT Tuimoloau. And now it's just a question of health, right? The coaching staff is doing him a disservice putting him out there at 60%.
Right.
They are. Like, I'm a firm believer in that. And that's kind of where I'm at with Rocco, man. Like, in the overall offensive line situation, it sounds like you and I see it relatively similar.
I mean, look, bottom line, Jagasaw has to play. And to be honest with you, I don't care where it is, but he needs to be on the field. And I think everybody that watched that game would agree. And I'm sure Notre Dame agrees as well. I mean, he needs to play. Whether it's just because he hasn't played all year and he's got a ton of energy and he's ready to roll. I mean, that's one part of it. But the other part of it is, look, he was going to be your starting left tackle. Like, he is a very, very good. He was your best offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Or at least in the discussion to be. And, he showed that he can do it. And they need him. They need him in this game because the offensive line looked markedly different once he was in the game. I mean, and again, it's not a knock on Rocco. It's more of a compliment to Charles. Like, that's the way I look at it. I mean, and he is that good. That's the thing. He is that good. So let's talk a little bit about Aeneas and kind of what you saw from him, and more importantly, the manner in which they used him in this game, I think is important too.
Oh, I mean, it was fantastic. I mean, we're talking about a kid that had over 2,000 receiving yards in high school, right, as a running back. And so they found different ways to utilize him. And now I can confidently say, like, I'd add Aeneas, add his name to the list of how do you stop Riley Leonard and Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Add in Aeneas Williams to that mix. What he did in the passing game was fantastic. And I think some of that was a byproduct of the adjustments that Mike Denbrock made throughout this game. But he was a safety blanket for Steve in that 2-minute drill. It was crucial. And like I said before, Steve, they converted 3 third downs on that drive. One of them was a slant to Faison that he had a really nice run after the catch on. Another one was a quick out to Mitchell Evans, and another one was a quick dump off pass to Aeneas Williams where he got out of bounds and ultimately put them really close into field goal range. And then before the sack, it was going to be well within a 40-yard field goal attempt. Doesn't matter for our guy, Mr. January, Mitch Jeter. But, it's Aeneas Williams showed a lot. I mean, he executed his job really well. The coaching staff speaks very highly about him in press conferences and different interviews. And it's not hyperbolic when the coaches say that these players have earned our trust.
Right.
Not a lot of times in a first possession of the second half do you ask your true freshman running back to run a slant and go on a linebacker like Kobe King. And that's exactly what they asked him to do and executed it perfectly. And for those who might not understand it, that's not an easy catch to make. Like, Leonard threw a great ball
over the shoulder for a running back. I mean, good call.
Like to where I've seen running backs this season drop like tosses, right? Like it was a heck of a catch. It was a heck of a catch. But I mean, a lot of that was a byproduct of what Mike Denbrock did to scheme things open.
Yeah.
Right. He went at the start of the second half, they went to more pin and pull. And I do think some of that is because they had a healthier guard in to be able to do it.
Who could move. Like look, Rocco couldn't move like that with his ankle. Again, it's because of injury, but he couldn't move because of his ankle. Charles Jagasaw can move. He can pick him up and put him down. Okay. Yeah. And that's absolutely one of the reasons that they went to it. And also, it was a scheme. It was a scheme situation. There's no doubt about that. But they were able to execute it much better with him.
Well, and what they were able to do with that adjustment is the entire first half they had 15 rushing yards, and in the first 3 plays of the first drive of the third quarter, Jeremiah Love rushed for 6 yards. Jeremiah Love rushed for 9 yards. Jeremiah Love rushed for 9 yards.
Right.
So they outgained their entire first half output on the first 3 plays of that drive before that 36-yard slow go to Aeneas Williams that put them in the red zone. So, yeah, man, I mean, the adjustments were massive. That was a big thing for me after watching the film because those are the things that I need a little bit of time. I'm not as good as Brian at being able to, like, notice the adjustment, like, real time. Like it's one of those where it's like, I know there's adjustments being made, but I can't tell you like
it's his superpower, man. Like, and that's
man.
okay. That's okay. That's why we're in the league of whatever, the league of superheroes, but he's Superman, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I was about to say, man, like I got a roll. I could be the guy in the chair.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm Alfred. That'll be me.
Wait, does that make me Robin? I don't know if how I feel about that.
I don't know.
Whatever.
You can be Catwoman.
Oh boy. I'm just gonna let that one just lie right where it's at. Anything else you want to talk about from a positive standpoint, offensively, before we get into kind of the struggles that you noticed?
No, man. I mean, overall, like I said, it's just the offense did what they needed to and stepped up in the second half.
Yeah. We talked about Rocco. I don't really want to beat that horse anymore because it's going to sound like we're being negative about Rocco, and I don't want to do that. But you did also mention to me in our little pregame chat about Emil Wagner and kind of what. Now, Emil Wagner probably drew the toughest, matchup of the day, having to take on Carter all day long, and especially because of his shoulder, he stayed on the offense's right-hand side the entire time. And so Emil Wagner had his work cut out for him the entire time. Didn't do great. But again, he's going up against an absolute dude.
It's interesting, right? Because typically we know Emil Wagner for his consistency in pass blocking. And after this game, he was Notre Dame's, per Pro Football Focus, take their grades for what you want, but he was Notre Dame's highest graded run blocking offensive lineman, which I thought was interesting. And he was their second lowest graded pass blocking offensive lineman. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Emil Wagner that game, he allowed 1 sack, 1 hit on the quarterback, and 3 hurries, totaling 5 pressures. And again, he's going up against a guy. There was a lot of reports coming out about his shoulder, which, let me be clear, has nothing to do with your legs.
No, it doesn't.
And Abdul Carter is very fast off the edge. And, I mean, there were reps. Like, look, I don't want to say that Emil Wagner played like absolute, he wasn't an absolute bum out there. He won some reps. But winning reps against Abdul Carter is just like holding on long enough to give your quarterback time. Mm-hmm. Like it's not picking him up and throwing him.
Yeah.
But Emil Wagner struggled. And unfortunately, it's not like the task on January 20th gets much easier because he will be going up against one of JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer. And Jack Sawyer, for those who watched the game, was the guy who Texas's right tackle is probably going to be a first-round draft pick. And Jack Sawyer absolutely owned him on that play.
On that play, he did.
Yeah, strip sack and picked it up and ran it back for a touchdown. Yeah. So, it's going to be interesting to see how he performs, and I believe that he can bounce back. But yeah, Emil Wagner, after going back through and watching the film, he struggled. He struggled with the speed that Abdul Carter had, for sure.
No, completely agree with that. I'm not going to add anything else to it. So let's flip the script over to the defense, Trev, and who stood out. It's funny because long list of offensive guys who stood out, very small list of who struggled. And then on the defensive side, very small list of who stood out and a longer list of who struggled. So I just found that to be rather funny. So who stood out to you the most that we didn't cover? And that's the other part of it, that we didn't cover in the postgame.
Yeah, I mean, that we didn't cover in the postgame, I will say, like, Jalen Sneed had a really good second half. Penn State had a lot of success running the ball to the perimeter. And in the postgame show, we talked a lot about R.J. Oben and Josh Burnham. But Jalen Sneed was a guy that was coming downhill and funneling things back inside a lot. Like, he had a big play on a crucial one, he had the pressure on Drew Aller, which forced the interception.
Right,
but
right.
On a third down at the end of the game, not at the end of the game, but a third down towards the end of the game, he penetrated the backfield early and he got hands on a run. He wasn't able to finish the tackle, slowed him down long enough for the rest of the dogs to come and rally, and they ended up stopping him short of the marker, which I believe forced a punt. So it was one of those for me that, Jalen Sneed, the stat sheet might not look super crazy for him. He finished the day with, Jalen Sneed finished the day with 6 tackles, 2 solo tackles, no tackles for a loss, no sacks, but he was an integral part of setting the edge and funneling runs back in, because Penn State was having their way with that in the first half. So I thought that Jalen Sneed played really well.
He's kind of been like a sneaky player, I feel like, all season, because he doesn't make a ton of plays, but the ones he does make are very impactful in the game. And I don't think this last game was any different. You know what I mean? It just feels like he makes big plays in the moment. And he's found his role, man. He's found his niche. He's found his role, and he's played it well. So, yeah, I agree with you. I thought Jalen Sneed did a good job in the moment, and when it mattered, that's when he came through, for sure. RJ Oben is another guy that you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, he's somebody that we talked about on the post game as well. So again, like I don't want to take a deep dive too much into it, but he along with Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham did a really good job of setting the edge again on Penn State's rushing offense. So when I go back through and I look at what their run blocking grades were or what their defensive grades were, RJ Oben had a pretty good day on defense. I mean, he was middle of the pack in terms of where he graded out at, but he was one of the few players on the team that didn't have a recorded missed tackle. Like I said, like they had 15 on the day. He was a short tackler, and he did a lot of good things funneling Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen back to the teeth of the defense in the second half. He was a leading factor into why they held them to -3 yards rushing in the third quarter. So that adjustment was huge for them. Just from a technical standpoint, they were doing things a lot better in the second half as well. Like the defensive line in the first half was doing things that were uncharacteristic of stuff that they hadn't done all season long. It was weird. It was almost like they were trying to like drive into the Penn State offensive lineman with their shoulder at times, which was really weird. They weren't extending off of offensive linemen at all, but RJ Oben stepped it up in the second half for sure.
Yeah. Yep. No doubt about it. So let's talk about what you saw that wasn't impressive to you. And I'll kind of let you take off here, and then I'll fill in the gaps once you start off where you want to start off.
Yeah, I mean, there were some things that jumped out to me on film, and we don't have to cover all of them because some of them are in the same light. Tackling, like I said, was a major issue against Penn State. You went from 4 missed tackles against Georgia to 15 missed tackles against Penn State. And I know that Penn State has more dynamic running backs than Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen are about as good of a 1-2 punch as what Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are. And statistically, they played better than both of them did. Impact-wise, up for debate, right? Jeremiah Love's touchdown run was crazy. But, the defense took bad angles in the first half. And like Leonard Moore, for the praise that we had given him all year in coverage, like we were talking about how he was going to grow into a really good cover corner, but in run support, he was stronger already than what Ben Morrison was, just from a size standpoint, right? I mean, Ben Morrison was 5'11", 185. Leonard Moore, 6'2", 190. And Leonard Moore had some tackling issues yesterday, man. I mean, he wasn't bringing his feet with him. He was reaching. There was a 4th and 2 early in the game. And if Leonard Moore took a better angle, that might have been a tackle in the backfield, or at least got hands on him long enough to let the other troops rally to the football. And so it was tough, man. It was really tough. Like the tackling wasn't great. Leonard Moore struggled in the run game.
That's the biggest one for me is the tackling, or especially early. Tackling was very poor. The very first play of the game where they did that little toss sweep, it seems like everybody tries to do against Notre Dame, and it gets shut down every single time. And Notre Dame was there. They were there to make the play in the backfield or for a no gain, miss the tackle, ends up picking up like 6 or 7 yards. Yeah. It's like, because I remember saying, I saw the toss, like, everybody tries this. And I see, I forget who it was now, but I see Notre Dame coming down and getting ready to make the tackle. And it was like, well, that didn't work out too well. You know what I mean? And so it's not like they weren't there, but they just weren't making the tackles. And that was extremely frustrating early on.
Yeah, man. I mean, the other person that I'm going to throw in that kind of same ring is Jaden Ausberry, one of Notre Dame's other really good tacklers in space.
Yeah.
And Jaden Osbury, I mean, he had the opportunity. He was the player that I was talking about where Tyler Warren lined up in the shotgun. He rolled out right he was looking to pass. And from a coverage standpoint, Notre Dame did a good job of shutting it down, right? And then Tyler Warren ended up rolling out back left. Jaden Osbury had the angle on him, and he could have tackled him for an 8-yard loss in the backfield. Instead, that play turned into an 8-yard rush for Tyler Warren. And so, like, when we talk about the opponent that they have coming up, and they have guys like they'll give Jeremiah Smith the ball on a jet sweep and let him get to the outside. Travion Henderson, if anybody doesn't know by now, you want to talk about a running back that is in the conversation with the Nicholas Singletons, the Jeremiah Loves of the world. Anytime Travion Henderson touches the ball, it could go.
Oh, that last play at the end of the first half, I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me?"
The second I was watching it on the couch, I was like, "Dude!" The second he caught that screen pass, I was like, "See ya."
Yeah, because he had like 5 guys in front of him, like ready to block too.
Full head of steam.
Yes,
with a full head of steam.
Why is Texas blitzing in that moment? By the way, but just throwing that out there,
like blitzing and then bailing everybody else. But anyways,
so bad.
I get it.
Anyway, but doesn't take away from how elite that kid is. Because his burst of speed and his overall speed, like as soon as he got the ball, it's like bye-bye.
Yeah, so, like I said, anytime that 32 in scarlet and gray, when he touches the ball, he could go. And those are going to be tackles that the Leonard Moores of the world and the Jaden Osburys of the world are going to have to execute on when they have the opportunity to force negative plays. Because if there's one thing that Ohio State showed me in that Texas game is similar to Notre Dame, more times than not, when they get behind the sticks, their offense struggles to sustain drives, right? Like when you have opportunities to make tackles for a loss, you have to be able to bring your feet with you. Yeah. Some of it's stuff that we covered already throughout the show. Okay. Notre Dame, they struggled with the stretch play early. The offensive line would slant play side, and they would release the backside defensive end. And there's just no answer to it. I do think like Drake Bowen, from a tackling standpoint, I thought he was fine. Like I don't really put him in the missed tackle ring that I'm putting some of the other players in. I just thought that there were some plays where he was a step late in reading and reacting to some of the plays. Like I think that was some of the reason why that Penn State had some success with stretch plays. Is because I think there were a couple plays where Drake Bowen was a step late. Yeah, there was a step late. So, but like I said, really the rest of the stuff that I had and that I gathered from film was just the inability to tackle in space and the inability to set the edge.
Well, and it hurt them. I mean, let's be honest. It hurt them, and it allowed Penn State to continue the drive, specifically that first drive where they just went right down the field. It felt like, or it wasn't the first, it was the touchdown drive. It just felt like, and that field goal drive too. That field goal drive, I think, was the most egregious because there was just a sustained drive where they just kind of took control, is what it felt like. It was a 14-play, 55-yard drive, but it was just like it took 10 minutes and 13 seconds. And a lot of that sustained drive was the fact that Notre Dame didn't tackle very well. And then it was backed up right afterwards by a 15-play, 90-yard drive that took over 7 minutes off the clock. So it's just like the tackling was horrendous during those 2 drives. And that's what got Notre Dame down 10-0. And that was tough. I mean, that was a tough one. So one final opportunity, Trev, to kind of get anything out there that you saw that you wanted to bring up. Offense, defense, whatever, man. Special teams. Let's have it.
I was just about to say the only thing that I was going to say is Mitch Jeter's absolute money. That's all I was going to say.
I need to go back and look because I've seen a lot of people talk about, and I forgot to look at it at the time, but I've seen a lot of people talk about the fact that they leapt over the center on that play to try to block it. 2 players. Well, there you go.
So one jumped over head up over the center, and the other one, like the other player to the long snapper's right, like used him as leverage to also leap over.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Totally illegal. Mm-hmm. Totally illegal. Okay, got it. Well, it's a good thing he made the kick because it ended up not mattering, because if they would have called the penalty, Notre Dame would have declined it, and it would have been a good field goal. So I guess it really doesn't matter in the long run, but come on, guys, let's protect these players. Mm-hmm. Suppose I heard it was all about safety. That's what I keep getting told. But all these new rules and everything. But anyway,
no, they're only going to throw a flag when a 6-foot-tall safety impedes in a 6'6", 250 pounds tight end's ability to catch the football.
Right, by barely grazing his chest. Got it. Yeah. All right, everybody. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on what day is this? Saturday afternoon, into the early evening. Go ahead. You guys.
The only other thing I saw a couple of questions about the transfer portal commits.
Yes,
and I believe that Brian is going to touch on that tomorrow. Okay. So I don't want to spoil anything for any of the show, but I don't know the in-depth backstory of a lot of these kids, but the ones that they got today was Jared Dawson from Louisville. He's a defensive tackle for them. He's 6'2", 300-plus pound guy. They also got a kid, Elijah Hughes, from USC, who's a defensive tackle. And he's a kid that didn't get a lot of snaps from USC, so going and looking at what his stats aren't going to do you a whole lot of justice. He's just a kid that went to a lot of Notre Dame camps. They have good numbers on him.
And he's young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's young. He has a lot of eligibility left. He's a redshirt freshman. He was a redshirt freshman in 2024. So he has a lot of eligibility left. And they got the Noah Burnett kid, transfer portal grad school kicker, graduate. Oh, my goodness. A graduate transfer kicker from North Carolina. So Brian's going to do a recap, I believe, tomorrow. I think I saw him tweeted out that he's going to talk about them tomorrow, but didn't want you guys to think that we weren't going to talk about more exciting Notre Dame news that's also happening for the 2025 season. But it was upon further review, and Notre Dame still has one more game left to play.
There'll be plenty of time to talk about transfers and the offseason and spring practice and all that, but that is post January 20th. Because Notre Dame still has a game to play, folks, and we're all very, very excited about it. So make sure you stay locked in to Irish Breakdown. Hit that notification bell so you know when there's going to be another show, and apparently there may be one tomorrow. So you're not going to know unless you hit that notification bell, or if you're on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. Definitely want to get over there. There's already some backstory, a little bit of something over there about these grad transfers, or about these transfers coming into Notre Dame. But then more will be revealed as they move on, and there could be another announcement here soon, Trevor, of another transfer. But we're not going to give it away because we don't steal kids' moments. That's not what we do. So, but you're gonna have to stay locked into Irish Breakdown, get on the boards, check out the show, and you'll get all the backstory, all the good stuff. So, appreciate everybody hanging out with us. Brian is on his way back from sunny Miami. He will be back very soon. And as I mentioned earlier, he will be welcomed by a nice blanket of snow up here in South Bend. So looking forward to hearing him complain about that. But anyway, so for Trevor, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you guys next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.